Thank you, Volker, for being a fantastic host. I'm very excited to present this paper. Um, Also, I'm also excited to get your feedback, and any comments would be very very valuable to me because we are still developing the paper. We've submitted it, but we are still working on some of the things, and we want to incorporate as much feedback as is provided to us. Okay. So as already mentioned, this is a joint work with my fantastic co-authors, I must admit, Chonggu Choi and Noriaki Matsushima. And Chonggu is from Monash University and Noriaki is from Osaka. So let me quickly start the paper, go directly into the paper. Um, in recent times, data has become actually very important in in our lives. Data is so important that people talk about the data economy, right? It's something virtual, but it's very very important. It has spawned industries. It has created lots of value, right? And this can also just be seen by the fact that firms know that by collecting data they can actually offer they can earn money from the market but also offer consumers better services, right? So the importance of data for firms also can also be seen through the fact that firms are willing to offer consumers some additional benefits in return for data, right? And that can be often seen through either firms say that if you give me your data, I can offer you personalized recommendations or perhaps preference harmonization across devices, right? So you can already see that firms are willing to go the extra mile in return for data because data has value not just in one market but across markets, right? So it has this additive and super additive property in some cases. So firms know this and they want to encourage firms to share data. Another example of this is that firms, if, for example, this is in Australia, as my co-author is from Monash, he pointed out this that where if you click on the terms and conditions, then you get additional benefits that only people who share data offer, right? Are able to get. So these all kind of things kind of make you realize the data is very important for the industry, right? Given the importance of data in our lives and in the industry, policymakers didn't want to be away from the action. They also wanted to get on the bandwagon of the data economy, right? They wanted to understand. So data is valuable for kind of firms, and it's created a whole industry. But is it actually also is data the value from data also being provided to consumers? So one of the things that policymakers started doing was that they said let's offer consumers some way to have bargaining power over their data. One of the options was to allow to create this GDPR. GDPR is a fantastic regulation that gave consumers power over their data to choose when to share and not to share, right? And also to port the data. So, but in our setting today, we're going to only focus on this aspect of when consumers can decide to share and not to share data. Okay, because that is, I think, a very interesting problem for us, at least theorists, and that we can understand a little bit more the nuances of what is happening with a theoretical model. Okay, so as you can see, GDPR was enacted in 2018, and it became a success across policymakers. You will find that it was adopted by many countries. A similar, kind of regulation, such as Brazil, Chile, Japan, New Zealand, Singapore, South Korea, and quite a few others. At the same time, also California Consumer Privacy Act also came into being, right? So you can already see that as soon as one act was, kind of was adopted, quite a few other countries accepted it and they realized the value of it. But given that it has been adopted in so many places, right, in so many jurisdictions, its impact can be huge and therefore also widely debated because people on either sides of the table are going to say, that because the impact is negative and so many people adopted it, it has a very negative impact. Or vice versa, because the impact is positive, people on the other side of the table are going to say its impact is very, very positive, right? So there are very often, when you have these regulations that have a large impact, there are different um, kind of industry groups or different sets of people who are going to oppose it, and they're going to say it's going to have a very negative or very positive impact specifically. So as you can see, it has been widely debated. There are two main, obviously, very extreme viewpoints in a sense. One is that there's a the GDPR has a positive, benefit to the economy and to society. And obviously, one of the people who's propagating it is the European Union, because it has itself, home bias, right? It's building its own it wants to go behind that it did a good job, it did the right thing, right? And also privacy advocates. The main arguments that they give for this are perhaps consumers have, when they have more control over data, they can actually trust the market and they will enter the market, and that will lead to more expansion of demand, right? Because now you have more trust, especially in Germany. Now more consumers, I've understood that consumers are willing to go online and buy stuff which they were not doing before, because Germans are very, very privacy conscious. Similarly, transparency, and also it brings into account accountability, right? If you do something wrong with my data, you will be punished, right? So all of these things are the positive view of GDPR. The negative view of GDPR, is mostly coming from industry groups that say it's complex, it has a lot of compliance issues, and it hurts firm profitability. And there's a literature that says that it also hurts smaller firms. So obviously, there's this very nice Bloomberg article, which I believe is more like clickbait, which says that Europe's privacy rules mostly hurt small firms and not tech giants, which is, kind of looking at only the case where when you initially adopt GDPR, when you have this initial cost, obviously larger firms are going to benefit from economies of scale. But in the longer run, once you adopt it, things are going to be very different, right? So we believe that these results a little bit more, these two viewpoints in our paper, we are able to reconcile in one model, because most papers either go this way, research either goes positive or negative. So we are through our paper able to reconcile these two views by showing that GDPR allows for demand expansion, which is in a sense like more transparency in the market, and that leads to more consumers willing to join. But also it may hurt firms, it may hurt consumers as well, and we're trying to describe when this happens. Okay, so what does this paper do? This paper, first, it tries to understand how a firm sets its price under under a certain specific regime. No GDPR or yes GDPR. Okay. And what we do then, we compare these two cases when firms have control over data, when consumers have control over data versus when they don't have control over data. Okay. And the questions that we ask then are, what is the impact of this opt-in requirement of GDPR on firm pricing strategy? Because at present in our model, that is the only strategic variable. In the future, we plan to do other strategic, interactions, but that is currently the only one. Okay. Then we try to ask, given this strategy, this impact on firm strategy, how do consumers, do consumers actually benefit from more control over their data? Okay. And finally, we ask is, do digital firms also benefit from data? Right? No, from GDPR, right? It's not clear, because it might be that, because they're losing out a lot of data, they might be losing a large chunk of their revenue share, and they may be worse off, right? So we're going to, dig deeper into it and try to disentangle some of these, discussions and results and questions that we're going to do. Okay. So what are the main results that we find in our paper? Consumer control over data, like through opt-in requirement and due to GDPR, leads to first higher consumer prices unambiguously. Okay. But this does not mean consumers are worse off. Okay. Second, what we find is total demand can be higher under GDPR. We'll explain there are two opposing effects and how they play out, and that may lead to higher demand or lower demand. Finally, firms' profits are higher under GDPR when firms employ a usage-based model. What we mean by this is that firms who who are mostly focused on offering services, that means most of the revenue comes from charging prices to consumers, they are going to be better off. Instead, firms whose the biggest portion of the revenue comes from data, they're going to be worse off. Okay, so we're going to break this down and explain why this is the case. And finally, we again find consumer surplus is higher under GDPR in markets where firms employ again a usage-based model, where firms most of the time make money out of prices, and data is not a crucial element for them. Okay, and in those markets, GDPR actually benefits firms and consumers. On the contrary, it will hurt consumers and kind of firms when in markets where um, firms mostly employ a data-based revenue model. Okay, we're going to discuss this in more detail. So let's go into first literature. Most of the literature has either kind of until now, which we know of, has mostly focused on GDPR either being neutral or having a negative impact in the market in some form or the other, right? There's a very nice paper by Choi et al., which looks at opt-in regulation of opt-in regulation and says that it's ineffective if firms can price discriminate. But they have multiple. We differ from them because of the fact that they assume covered demand, which in our case, if you have covered demand, you can't have demand expansion anymore. If you don't have demand expansion, then you don't get the result that we find. Because we want to actually, as we said, we want to reconcile the two different views together and try to understand what's happening. Next, the paper by Fine Messer et al. Is also very, very interesting, which also looks at optimal data sharing strategy, and it depends on the firm's business model, where they talk about usage-based, which is mostly prices, or whether it's data-based. But they don't have any strategy interaction, decision on prices or opt-in decisions. Kay and Sudhir, they also, look at, firms' decisions to opt-in. And in their paper, all consumers opt in. In our setting, as in the real world, what we observe is that some consumers for some websites will choose to opt in because they benefit from what services the firm is providing, and in some cases they will choose not to opt in, right? So in both these cases, we are we are able to incorporate in our paper. Finally, there is also Campbell et al., which says consent requirement may actually benefit large firms due to one-off costs. But this is more of a short-term analysis, which is looking at you have a fixed cost, and obviously larger firms who have more kind of bigger demand. At the end, when you have fixed cost divided by the number of consumers, it's a very small average marginal cost. But that's only when you implement it. After implementing, it's a one-off cost. It's going to be completely different, right? So, and finally, there is this paper by Gopal, Hidashi, and et al., and they find that post GDPR, because less consumers share data, firms will find greater avenues for monetizing data by going to different third parties, and that may actually hurt firms, consumers. Okay, so in contrast to most of these papers, what we do is we have that consumers are heterogeneous, or means they're distributed and they're heterogeneous on two dimensions. That means they're heterogeneous in their value for the product and privacy costs. This has not been done in most papers. Actually, there's no paper that we know of that focuses on GDPR that looks at two-dimensional consumers. But this allows us to disentangle these two effects and explain more clearly on, kind of how the demand expansion effect plays out. Okay, and the two dimensions that we have are consumers' value for the good and privacy costs. Okay, and this is actually very well documented, and it makes sense. Different consumers will have different privacy valuations and also just value for the product. Okay, so let's go to the baseline model. The baseline model is rather kind of simple. There's a firm that sets a price P and benefits from database revenues alpha, or rather database margins alpha. So, and in return for data, it offers consumers an opt-in benefit X, right? So if consumers share data, then they get this value X, okay, in return. And consumers in our setting are distributed according to the preferences in two dimensions. One is discomfort from sharing data, which is the y-axis, and the valuation for the product, V. That means how much they value the product. Okay, and we assume that for the baseline, we assume these preferences on the two dimensions are not correlated. But I must point out straight away that our results go through with positively correlated preferences, and under negative correlated preferences, under some certain conditions they go through. But I must admit, it's not very easy to understand what's happening when you have negative correlation. Okay, so how does a consumer look like in our setting? So as I said, there are two dimensions. So we can easily represent all consumers on a square. So a consumer of type V tilde and C tilde, that is of who has value V for the product and C for privacy, has a cost of privacy C, is going to be located at this dot here. Okay. And having said that, now we can actually move on to now, how do we model consumer utility? A consumer of type V and C gets the following utility when it does not share data, which we call UN. If it does not share data, it has no privacy costs, right? That is the kind of the idea that we have. If you don't have if you don't share data, you don't have any privacy costs. Then all you care about when you want to buy the product is the value for the product minus the price for them, right? Because you're not having any privacy costs because you're not sharing data. And so V is the utility from consumption and P is the price. Okay. And if you share data, what happens is consumers have something called in their utility. They have an additional part that's called X minus C. X is the benefit that you get from sharing data, and minus C is the cost that you get incurred when you share data. Now you can already see what's happening. Remember, consumers distribute according to their costs. So consumers of a high cost may choose not to share data because this X is too small for them, because the benefit that they get are too small for them. Okay, so X is, again, as I want to clarify, the opt-in benefit arising from sharing data, and C is the disutility arising from sharing data. Okay, so what do firms' profits look like in our setting? Firm profits are rather simple. They're a composite term of two parts, which consists of sales revenues, price multiplied by demand, and database revenues, where alpha is the margin per each unit of data they get from consumers. And DS is the mass of consumers who share data. Okay, so as I said, firms' profits are, in at least we believe in the online world, firms' profit have these two elements. Okay, so pre-GDPR, as we said, consumers have no control over their demand. Total demand is just equal to all the consumers who buy the product and also share data, because the consumers don't have a choice. All consumers who buy have to share data. Okay, post GDPR, total demand now is comprises of two parts now. One is set of consumers who do not share data, DN, plus set of consumers who share data, right? So this is, again, it becomes a composite, because post GDPR now firms have the choice. No, consumers have the choice to share data, right? So this opt-in requirement, creates two sets of consumers. Ooh. Yes. Now going to timing. Timing is rather straightforward. It's very simple because the model is so complex, and so we made a very simple setting now, and then we have extended to multiple other settings, because a simple setting easily explains the intuition. We don't want to get into complexities and avoid losing out on intuition. So the firm sets a price P given a policy regime, pre-GDPR or post-GDPR. The firm sets a price P, and consumers decide, depending on the regime, whether to buy the product or share data. Okay, and under GDPR, they can choose to share data. Under when the pre-GDPR, they don't have a choice. Either they have to buy and share data or not. Okay, and we solve by a simple subgame perfect matching. So in the benchmark, as I said, the pre-GDPR case, consumers have no control over their data. That means we can discuss further what this means, but basically all consumers that buy the product have to share data, don't have a choice, because firms don't give them a choice, because they benefit from the revenues coming from consumers who buy data, right? Who share data. So then in return, the firm offers consumers an opt-in benefit X to these consumers. So now what's happening? Consumers have just two choices. I buy the product and share data, or don't buy the product. If I don't want to share data, I don't have to buy the product. So basically, it can be basically seen as all consumers who share data, they should get a positive utility. Only those consumers will participate in the market. Okay, and then we can solve for these two kind of thresholds. And I'll avoid the math because it doesn't matter much. These figures explain everything. So as I said earlier, our consumers can be easily represented on the square, right? So in case one, it's rather simple to see. All consumers with a value very, very high and low privacy costs are going to buy the product given a price P. Okay. And instead, if your value is low or your privacy costs are high, you're not going to buy the product because it's not worth for you. You're losing out on privacy and the value is not good enough for you, so you don't want to buy the product given the price. In this as well, the same, just the difference, these two cases are, in this case, firms are mostly in a regime where kind of the value, the margins from data are very, very low. That means most of the revenues come from prices. And this regime is the case where most of the revenues comes from data. Okay, so that is why when most of the revenue comes from data, you're actually given a price. It can be that you cover the full market in return for encouraging more consumers to join the market. Okay. So now going to firms' profit and strategies. Firms choose price P to maximize profits. Pre-GDPR, remember, all consumers who bought the product also shared the product, shared data, right? So then you can write the firm's profit as just P, which is the price that they charge each consumer, plus the margin, the data margin from each consumer, right? P plus alpha multiplied by the total demand. That means all consumers who buy are also sharing data. Now, when firms set prices, there's always a classic margin effect. If I increase my price, I get greater margin, but also volume effect. The set of consumers who buy the product is going to shrink. So they're the two opposing effects. In addition to that, there's also the data volume effect. That means if I increase the price, what's going to happen? A lesser number of consumers are going to buy the product and share data. So I'm going to lose out on revenues from data. So that will encourage me to lower the price on average because I get revenues from data. So I want a larger volume to come and share data. Okay. So data volume effect normally lowers price below monopoly levels under the case when firms do not have access to data. Okay. So what we find is that the equilibrium price and demands are given by the following, but all that matters, I would like to say, is that as the margins from data increases, prices are going to fall because now firms value a larger volume of consumers, and so they're going to lower the price to attract more consumers to buy the product, and also the price actually increases when the opt-in benefits increase because it's just like a quality shift upwards. Okay, the equilibrium demand, profit, and consumer surplus are all increasing in the opt-in benefits X and the marginal data-based revenue. Okay. Next, going to the case of kind of post GDPR. Now, what's happening is, remember, post GDPR, consumers now can choose to share data or not, right? That's going to play an important role. What happens is, before I move forward, I want to recall to you all that the utilities when consumers share data and they don't share data. Okay, and in this case, when you compare the two utilities, you notice that all that matters is a consumer whose privacy cost is low enough. When you compare, you do the check with which of the two is higher, you will see that if the privacy costs are low, it will want to share data. If privacy costs are high, it will just say, nah, I will opt out and just buy the product and not share data. Okay, so what's happening? GDPR allows consumers to have an additional choice in comparison to the pre-GDPR case, where consumers did not have a choice to share data or not. What's happening here now? Consumers have a choice to buy the product and not share data. This additional choice, actually what it does is it enhances demand because the consumers who had a high privacy cost and a high value for the product were not buying before, but now they can buy the product. Just to give you an idea, I will just go back. This region, if you see here, they value the product very much, right? But the privacy costs are very, very high. So they choose not to buy. Post GDPR, that region will certainly find it profitable to enter the market and buy the product. So they're going to be better off. So this enhanced choice is going to actually encourage consumers to kind of enter the market, and this can actually expand demand. So keeping prices constant, actually this leads to demand expansion in our setting. Why? Because now consumers have an additional choice in our model. So just to give you, I like these figures very much because they explain very well. The basic idea is this: all consumers who have a privacy cost below this X, that means below the opt-in benefits that are being offered, they are going to share the data and benefit from this opt-in benefits. All consumers who have a high value, okay, and but also high privacy costs are going to opt out because they don't find it worthwhile to share data and actually benefit from these opt-in benefits X, right? So all these consumers are going to opt out. Okay, similarly, we have a similar, kind of dynamic going on here. Again, remember, this case one is the case when firms' revenues mostly come from prices. And this case two is the case when firms' revenues mostly come from database sources. Okay, I'm going to avoid this, go directly to this point here. Again, we can substitute the demands. Now the difference between the previous setting and here, that is in the post GDPR case. Now notice there's a smaller mass of consumers sharing data. Only those consumers who have opted in are going to share data, right? That's going to play an important role because previously all consumers who bought had to share data. Now consumers have a choice. As a result, some consumers are going to choose not to share data. And that is why a smaller mass is going to share data here. Basically, only a portion of the total demand is going to share data. Okay, I'm going. The comparative statistics are not as interesting, but rather let's go into the comparison of the two regimes. First, what we find is GDPR increases prices. Okay, what does this mean? Let's get into the intuition of what happens. Keeping prices constant across the two regimes, because of this increased choice, demand expansion occurs, right? Keeping prices constant, demand expands. And as a result, the monopolist realizes that now it can extract surplus from a larger portion of demand. So it can take away a little bit of their surplus. How is it going to do so? By increasing the price. In addition, remember, we said database revenues actually database margins tend to depress the prices. Now remember, post GDPR, a smaller portion of demand also contributes towards profits, and thus firms, due to these two reasons, firms are going to set higher prices. They find it profitable to set higher prices. Now, given the prices have increased, what happens to total demand? We find super interesting result. Comparing, total consumer demand in the pre-GDPR and post-GDPR for a firm, we find that total demand is larger after GDPR in markets where revenues come mostly from prices and not from database sources. We'll explain what's happening here. Pre-GDPR, remember what does GDPR do? GDPR 1, it has a demand expansion effect, keeping prices constant. It expands demand, right? Because of more privacy choice. But also remember, it has a negative opposing force, which is that because prices have increased, it's going to lower demand, right? Lesser number of consumers may find it attractive now, right? So these two opposing forces are going to play out in our setting. And what we find is when markets where which are usage-based or where revenues from data are not very important, demand expansion effect dominates any price increasing effect. Because what happens is in those markets, already the prices were high because data didn't matter. Remember, we talked about data being, as a way of data lowers the prices. If data doesn't matter much, they're already at the monopoly level, right? So you in that case, price doesn't expand enough, but demand expansion occurs a lot. So demand expansion effect dominates the price increasing effect. On the contrary, when most of the revenue comes from alpha, prices are already very, very low. Okay, and post GDPR, we are in the situation where demand expansion is more restricted because you cover one full dimension. As a result, the price increasing effect dominates the demand expansion effect, resulting in total demand falling under GDPR for the cases when in markets where mostly revenues come from data-based sources. Now, what about profits? Actually, this is the easiest thing to see. Again, let me quickly explain what's happening is the x-axis is the database revenues and y-axis is opt-in benefits. Remember, when firms are mostly focused on services or usage-based revenues, right? That is when database revenues are not very important, prices are higher post-GDPR and demand is higher post-GDPR. That leads to profits increasing in this region. Okay. On the contrary, what do you say? When alpha is large, or when most of the revenue comes from data and not prices, what's happening here? You're not able to expand enough demand, but you increase the price. As a result, what we find is despite the price increase, consumer firms' profits are going to fall because they're not able to benefit from demand expansion coming from GDPR. And lesser number of consumers are sharing data. So what can we say? What are the implications for firms? GDPR can actually benefit digital businesses that earn revenues primarily from selling services, such as user-driven based businesses such as Uber, Lyft, Netflix, Spotify, and others. And it's going to hurt, what do you say, businesses that are mostly focused, whose revenues are coming large parts from data. And that's going to be Google, Facebook, and many others. Okay, so what about consumers? This is actually one of my favorite graphs. What I've done is now I've superimposed the two equilibrium demands to explain what is happening to different types of consumers. Remember, this triangle is the pre-GDPR demand. Okay, I'll explain only the case one because it's just easier to explain. And this this line here, one basically V star X to 1 is the post GDPR demand. Okay, now what's happening? Because prices have increased post GDPR, some consumers are going to drop out of the market who have low value, right, for the product, and they're going to drop out of the market. They are worse off. That's why I highlighted this red. In the green region, these consumers are better off under GDPR. Why? Because increased choice has led them to enter the market. So they are, kind of benefiting from GDPR, so they are better off. And then in region 3, consumers who buy, so these are consumers, again, these are worse off. Why? These consumers are buying the service and sharing data both pre and post GDPR, which implies that all that has changed for them is that the price has increased post GDPR, right? That's the reason why these consumers are worse off. In the region 4, it's not clear because these consumers were previously sharing data and now they choose not to share data. Okay, so because this happens due to two reasons. One is because the price increase makes it not profitable for some of the firms to kind of share data, and some of the consumers to share data, and also because of increased choice. So basically, all consumers here who have a high privacy costs are better off, and over here, all consumers who have a low privacy costs can actually be worse off. So in summary, what can we say? When comparing consumer surplus, we find that in markets where firms are mostly data-based, kind of revenues, the consumer surplus is worse off. And in markets where where alpha is very, very large, and in markets where most of the revenue comes from prices or from usage-based services, then consumer surplus is higher in those markets under GDPR. Okay, well, what's happening here? Let's first just roughly speak something. Roughly speaking, consumers with low privacy costs are better off under GDPR, and those with high privacy costs are worse off. With low privacy costs are worse off, and with high privacy costs are better off. Okay, to further understand the sum of these two opposing effects, what's happening here? Remember, total surplus, consumer surplus increases when data-based revenues, kind of alpha is small. What's happening here? When alpha is small, prices are already very, very high because database revenues don't depress prices, right? Pre-GDPR, okay? And as a result, post-GDPR, any increase in price is going to be only marginal, very little. But When alpha is small, we also remember there's a larger room for consumers to expand, because they're not covered on one dimension. Thus, consumers benefit from GDPR because benefits from GDPR dominates any loss due to price increase. Because the demand expansion effect dominates any price increasing effect. As a result, the consumer surplus also increases when firms are mostly usage based. A similar inverse argument can also be provided for the case when alpha, or when firms are mostly focused on data-based revenues. What are the implications? Consumers are better off in markets where firms employ a usage-based revenue model, and worse off in markets where firms employ a data-based revenue model. This is one more figure, which is not there in the paper, but I like to present it here because it's an additional new thing that comes out exclusively for Plamadiso talk. But more, the idea is that in markets where firms only care about usage-based revenues, there what you find, firms are better off and consumers are better off. In intermediate markets where data is not very, very important, firms are better off, but consumers are worse off. And in markets where firms mostly care about database revenues and not prices, price is not a very important tool. In those cases, firms are worse off and consumers are worse off due to GDPR. Okay. So our results go through under multiple extensions, such as correlation between V and C. Positive network benefits, what we say is that, suppose consumers who share data, they benefit all other consumers who share data. What it does is basically shifts the set of consumers who share data upwards, but our results go through. Similarly, negative data externality, what this basically says is all consumers who share data are negatively going to impact consumers who don't share data. Now, again, what's happening here? It's just going to expand the number of consumers who share data, because consumers who are not sharing data now say, anyway, my data is being stolen. How about I buy the product anyway? Okay, so in both the cases, we have a similar effect where demand shifts upward for the consumers who share data, but our results, by and large, goes through. And finally, what we do is we then look at the case why we need two dimensions to get our results. What we do is we look at only one dimension, either on value or privacy costs, and we show that to get our results and to tease out these more nuanced perspectives, we need multiple dimensions to get these, get our results to, describe what's happening. So in conclusion, what we find is that the impact and the effect of GDPR is more nuanced than what is being discussed. Empowering consumers in privacy management can actually benefit businesses. Especially active privacy management systems can actually expand demand, especially for consumers who are privacy conscious, as they can choose from multiple options. And what is the impact on firms? Firms that employ a usage-based revenue model benefit, and also their consumers. Instead, firms who mostly focus on data-based revenues models are worse off, and also their consumers. Okay. And our results are robust to a variety of extensions like correlation between V and C, positive network benefits, negative data externalities, and yes. Our results have direct managerial and testable implications for empirical researchers, because we are building hypotheses that people can test now. Okay, thank you.